midterm elections. At the Kennedy Center, the traditional New Year's Eve concert has been canceled. As you know, the administration unilaterally renamed the Kennedy Center to include Donald Trump's name, a move that lawmakers say was patently illegal. And some musicians have taken the president's actions to heart, refusing to perform at the storied venue. For some, it is a matter of principle over profit. As one musician put it, quote, "Losing my integrity would cost me more than any paycheck." Self-indulgent vanity projects, though, have preoccupied this president in his second term, and the Kennedy Center is merely the latest example of the president's edifice complex. His obsession with the trappings of autocratic grandeur extends to various White House projects, ranging from the mundane, like gilding the Oval Office and remodeling the Lincoln bathroom in marble, to the absolutely outrageous, like paving over the Rose Garden and demolishing the East Wing to make way for a $400 million
Okay, so the White House is in absolute panic mode right now, and we are talking full-blown constitutional crisis territory. Multiple sources inside the administration are telling us that President Trump is privately expressing serious concerns about potential prison time as Congress moves forward with what legal experts are calling the fastest-moving impeachment proceedings in American history. And look, this is not just another political battle or media circus. This is fundamentally different from what we saw in 2019 or 2021. We are talking about an impeachment process that is now directly tied to active criminal investigations at both the federal and state levels, investigations that carry the possibility of actual incarceration for a sitting president. The legal walls are closing in from multiple directions simultaneously, and the people around Trump are reportedly in full crisis management mode, trying to figure out how to navigate a situation that has no real precedent in American history. This is not hyperbole. This is not partisan spin. This is what is actually happening inside the corridors of power right now, and the implications for the presidency, for the balance of power, for the 2026 midterms, and for American democracy itself are absolutely massive. Now, before we dive deep into what is actually happening here, let me just say something that needs to be said. You cannot trust mainstream media anymore to give you the full picture on stories like this. Corporate networks are more interested in ratings and access than they are in telling you what is really going on behind closed doors. That is exactly why we built US Power Alert, to bring you real stories, real context, and absolutely no corporate spin. We dig into the legal documents, we talk to sources inside these institutions, we connect the dots that traditional media either misses or deliberately ignores. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines and understand what is really happening in Washington before everyone else catches on, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. We bring you this kind of deep analysis every single day, breaking down the stories that actually matter and cutting through all the noise. Just hit the subscribe button below to join this community. And if you want to support independent journalism that holds power accountable and refuses to bow to corporate interests, this is your moment. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and be part of a movement that truly cares about the truth. All right, let us get back to the video.
The president's DIY tendencies haven't been confined to the White House. Trump has festooned multiple government buildings with enormous banners bearing the image of his own face. And in his free time, Trump golfs or attends lavish parties at his Florida beach club Mar-a-Lago. And that tone-deaf behavior is setting off alarm bells. Take a listen.
His obsession with those kinds of issues actually are a political problem for him. I mean, people are sitting around and thinking about how they're going to pay their bills, and he seems obsessed with gold and putting his name on things and remodeling buildings and rebuilding monuments.
Here is what happened. Over the past 72 hours, the House of Representatives has moved with unprecedented speed to formalize impeachment proceedings against President Trump, and multiple committees are now working in parallel to compile what sources are describing as an overwhelming body of evidence related to potential abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and violations of federal campaign finance laws. But here is where this becomes exponentially more serious than previous impeachment attempts. The Department of Justice has confirmed that there are at least 3 separate grand jury investigations currently underway that are examining conduct that overlaps significantly with the impeachment inquiry. We are talking about potential criminal exposure that goes far beyond the political consequences of impeachment and removal from office. Legal experts who specialize in executive power and criminal law are saying on the record that if even a portion of the allegations being investigated are substantiated, Trump could be facing federal charges that carry significant prison time. And that possibility is not something that goes away just because he is a sitting president. The legal framework around prosecuting a sitting president is murky at best. But the moment he is either impeached and removed or leaves office in 2028, those protections evaporate completely. Now, the timing here is absolutely critical, and you need to understand the political chess game that is playing out in real time. Democrats took control of the House in the 2024 elections with a narrow majority. But what really matters is that several moderate Republicans, particularly those representing swing districts who are facing brutal re-election battles in 2026, are privately signaling that they might be open to voting for impeachment if the evidence is as damning as early reports suggest. These are not the usual suspects. These are Republicans who campaigned on supporting Trump, but who are now looking at polling data that shows their constituents are deeply concerned about what they are hearing in these investigations. One senior Republican strategist told reporters off the record that the party is in full meltdown mode behind closed doors because they are caught between a base that still loves Trump and suburban voters who are increasingly horrified by what is coming out in these hearings. The White House is trying to frame this as a partisan witch hunt, the same playbook they have used before. But the difference this time is that you have career prosecutors, federal judges, and even some Trump-appointed officials providing testimony and evidence that is very difficult to dismiss as political theater. Let me walk you through the specific allegations that are driving this impeachment push, because the details here matter enormously. The first major thread involves what investigators are calling a systematic scheme to use federal emergency powers and executive orders to funnel government contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars to companies owned by Trump family members and close associates. Congressional investigators have obtained internal White House emails and financial records that allegedly show a direct quid pro quo arrangement where favorable regulatory treatment and federal funding were exchanged for significant financial kickbacks that went directly into accounts controlled by Trump and his immediate family. The second thread involves potential obstruction of justice related to attempts to interfere with multiple ongoing federal investigations, including documented instances of Trump personally contacting prosecutors, threatening witnesses, and ordering subordinates to destroy evidence. The third thread, and this is the one that is really sending shockwaves through Washington, involves allegations of unauthorized secret negotiations with foreign governments that may have violated federal laws governing presidential authority and foreign policy and potentially compromised national security interests in ways that legal experts say could constitute treason or espionage under certain interpretations of the law. Now, here is the thing that is making this feel so urgent and so different from previous impeachment attempts. The evidence that is being presented is not just witness testimony or circumstantial connections. We are talking about financial records, encrypted communications that have been recovered by federal investigators, recordings of meetings and phone calls, and testimony from people who were literally in the room when these decisions were being made. The House committees have assembled a team of former federal prosecutors who specialized in organized crime and public corruption cases. And they are building this case the way you would build a RICO prosecution against a criminal enterprise. They are following the money, documenting the pattern of behavior, establishing the corrupt intent, and showing how the various schemes were coordinated and executed. Multiple news outlets have reported that the evidence dossier that has been compiled already exceeds 10,000 pages of documentation, and new material is being added every single day as more witnesses come forward and more records are subpoenaed and analyzed. The White House response has been exactly what you would expect: a combination of aggressive denial, attacks on the credibility of witnesses and investigators, and attempts to use executive privilege to block testimony and withhold documents. But here's where Trump's legal team is running into serious problems. Federal judges, including several Trump appointees, have been consistently ruling against White House attempts to claim executive privilege or immunity in these cases. Just last week, a federal appellate court issued a unanimous ruling that rejected the administration's argument that a sitting president cannot be investigated for criminal conduct while in office. The court explicitly stated that no person, including the president, is above the law, and that the constitutional framework does not grant the executive branch immunity from criminal accountability. That ruling is now being cited in multiple other cases, and it has fundamentally shifted the legal landscape in ways that are extremely problematic for Trump's defense strategy. Legal scholars are saying that this decision could become one of the most consequential rulings on executive power in modern American history, because it establishes clear precedent that presidential power has meaningful limits, and that those limits can be enforced through the criminal justice system. Okay? Let us break down what this actually means across multiple dimensions, because the implications here go way beyond just one person or one presidency. First, understand that we are potentially witnessing a fundamental redefinition of executive accountability in the American system. The question of whether a sitting president can be indicted and prosecuted for criminal conduct has been debated by legal scholars for decades, but it has never been tested in a real-world scenario until now. If these investigations move forward and result in criminal charges, either while Trump is still in office or immediately after, we are setting precedent that will govern how future presidents are held accountable for decades to come. This is not just about Trump. This is about whether the presidency is above the law or whether it is subject to the same criminal justice system that applies to every other American citizen. The answer to that question will shape the nature of American democracy and the balance of power between branches of government for generations. Second, the political ramifications of this are absolutely massive, especially heading into the 2026 midterm elections. Republicans are facing an impossible situation. If they stand by Trump and defend him against impeachment, they risk alienating moderate voters in suburban districts that are already leaning away from the party. But if they vote to impeach or even remain silent, they face the wrath of Trump's hardcore base, which still represents a huge portion of Republican primary voters. This internal division is already showing up in polling data. Recent surveys show that Republican voters are almost evenly split on whether they believe Trump should remain in office if the allegations are proven, which is a stunning shift from where the party was just 2 years ago. Several prominent Republican senators who are up for re-election in 2026 have started carefully distancing themselves from Trump, using language like "we need to let the investigation proceed and see where the evidence leads," which is political speak for "I am keeping my options open depending on how bad this gets." Meanwhile, Democrats are unified in pushing this forward as aggressively as possible, seeing this as both a constitutional obligation and a massive political opportunity to paint Republicans as the party that enabled and defended corruption at the highest levels of government. Third, the international dimension of this cannot be ignored. Our allies are watching this unfold with a mixture of concern and disbelief. European leaders who have already been dealing with uncertainty about American foreign policy under Trump are now facing the very real possibility that the United States could be dealing with a constitutional crisis involving criminal prosecution of its president right, as the world faces multiple simultaneous challenges from rising tensions with China, ongoing conflict in Eastern Europe, and instability in the Middle East. Behind closed doors, diplomats from allied nations are reportedly expressing serious concerns about whether the United States can be counted on as a reliable partner when its domestic politics are this chaotic and unstable. NATO officials have privately told colleagues that contingency plans are being developed for scenarios where the United States might be unable to fulfill its treaty obligations due to domestic political paralysis. The credibility and reliability of American leadership on the world stage is taking a massive hit, and that has real consequences for global stability and American national security interests. Fourth, let us talk about the economic implications, because markets absolutely hate uncertainty, and this situation is uncertainty on steroids. Every time there is a major development in these investigations in stock markets, currency exchanges, and bond yields, investors are trying to price in the risk of everything from policy paralysis to potential constitutional crisis, to the possibility of significant changes in economic policy if Trump is removed from office and replaced by his vice president. Business leaders who normally try to stay out of political fights are starting to speak up, with several major CEOs publicly calling for the investigations to be resolved quickly one way or another, because the ongoing uncertainty is making it impossible to make long-term investment and hiring decisions. Consumer confidence indicators are showing increasing nervousness, particularly among higher-income households who are more tuned into political news and more likely to adjust their spending behavior based on their assessment of political stability. The Federal Reserve has indicated in recent statements that political uncertainty is now a significant factor in their economic forecasting models, which is extraordinary because the Fed almost never comments on domestic political issues. Fifth, we need to consider what this means for the actual functioning of government over the next several months. If the House votes to impeach, which at this point seems increasingly likely based on the trajectory of the evidence and the political dynamics, the Senate will be required to hold a trial. Under Senate rules, an impeachment trial takes precedence over all other business, which means that the entire legislative agenda essentially grinds to a halt. We are talking about no votes on appropriations bills, no confirmations of judicial nominees, no action on any policy priorities, nothing except the impeachment trial until it is resolved. Given that the Senate trial for Trump's second impeachment in 2021 took several weeks, and this case involves significantly more complex allegations and more evidence, legal experts are estimating that a trial could last anywhere from 2 to 4 months. That is 2 to 4 months where the federal government is essentially frozen in place, unable to address any other issues, while the country and the world watch this legal and political drama play out. The knock-on effects of that kind of governmental paralysis are hard to even calculate, but they are real and they are potentially severe. Now here is where the prison dimension of this becomes especially significant. Impeachment and removal from office is a political process, not a criminal one. Even if Trump is impeached by the House and convicted by the Senate, which would remove him from the presidency, that does not directly result in any criminal penalties. Removal from office is the only punishment that can be imposed through impeachment. But what removal does do is eliminate the constitutional protections and practical obstacles that currently shield a sitting president from criminal prosecution. The moment Trump is no longer president, whether through impeachment, resignation, or the end of his term in 2028, he becomes a private citizen who can be indicted, arrested, tried, and potentially convicted and sentenced just like anyone else. And based on what legal experts are saying about the strength of the evidence that has been compiled in these grand jury investigations, the likelihood of criminal charges being filed the moment Trump leaves office is extremely high. We are talking about potential charges that include fraud, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, violations of campaign finance laws, and potentially even more serious charges related to national security and abuse of power. Some of these charges carry mandatory minimum sentences, and if convicted on multiple counts, Trump could be looking at years or even decades in prison. Let me be very clear about something that a lot of people are confused about. There is a long-standing Department of Justice policy, not a law but a policy, that says a sitting president cannot be indicted while in office. This policy is based on a legal opinion from the Office of Legal Counsel, and it has never been tested in court. But even if we assume that this policy remains in place and protects Trump as long as he is president, that protection disappears the second he is no longer president. And here is the critical part. If Trump is impeached and removed, or if he resigns to try to avoid impeachment, he does not get to negotiate some kind of immunity deal or pardon himself, at least not in any way that would hold up legally. A president cannot pardon himself for state crimes, only federal crimes, and several of the investigations involve potential state-level charges in New York and Georgia, where Trump has no ability to grant pardons. Additionally, if Trump were to resign, and his vice president took over and then tried to pardon Trump, that would be an enormously controversial move that would face immediate legal challenges and potentially enormous political backlash. The bottom line is that Trump's legal exposure is very real, very serious, and not something that can be easily avoided through political maneuvering. The people around Trump reportedly understand this reality very clearly, and that is why sources say the mood inside the White House is one of barely controlled panic. Trump himself is said to be oscillating between defiant rage and genuine fear, lashing out at advisors, obsessively watching cable news coverage, and spending hours on the phone with his legal team trying to game out various scenarios and strategies. Several senior administration officials have already quietly retained their own personal lawyers, a clear sign that they understand they might be facing individual criminal liability for their roles in the various schemes being investigated. There are reports of increased tensions and finger-pointing within the West Wing, with different factions trying to protect themselves and position themselves favorably for whatever comes next. The whole operation has the feel of a ship that is taking on water, with people starting to scramble for the lifeboats while the captain insists everything is fine and demands absolute loyalty. What we are watching in real time is something that has never happened before in American history. We have had presidents who resigned to avoid impeachment. We have had presidents who were impeached but not removed. We have had presidents who faced legal troubles after leaving office. But we have never had a situation where a sitting president is simultaneously facing impeachment proceedings that are likely to succeed and multiple criminal investigations that are likely to result in indictments the moment he leaves office. The combination of these two tracks, the political accountability through impeachment and the criminal accountability through prosecution, creates a situation where Trump has basically no good options. If he fights the impeachment and loses, he gets removed and then immediately faces criminal charges. If he resigns to try to avoid the public spectacle of impeachment, he still faces criminal charges and loses any remaining political leverage he might have to try to negotiate some kind of favorable outcome. If he tries to use presidential powers to obstruct the investigations or pardon himself or others, he likely triggers even more impeachment charges and criminal exposure. Every move he makes at this point carries enormous risk and potentially catastrophic consequences. The historical parallel that keeps coming up in conversations among historians and political scientists is Richard Nixon, but with crucial differences that make Trump's situation arguably worse. Nixon faced impeachment over Watergate and chose to resign before the House could vote. And then he received a pardon from Gerald Ford that protected him from federal prosecution. But Nixon was never seriously threatened with state-level charges, and the evidence against him, while damning, was primarily focused on one scandal, rather than a pattern of conduct spanning multiple years and multiple schemes. Trump is dealing with investigations into conduct that spans his entire presidency and beyond, involves potential crimes that go well beyond obstruction and abuse of power, and includes both federal and state jurisdictions where pardons cannot reach. The legal and political jeopardy Trump faces is, in many ways, unprecedented in scope and severity. So here is the bottom line on all of this. We are in the middle of a constitutional crisis that is going to define American politics for the next decade and potentially reshape the balance of power in our system of government. The question is not whether Trump is in serious legal trouble. The evidence that is emerging makes clear that he absolutely is. The question is how this plays out procedurally and politically over the coming months. Will the House vote to impeach? Almost certainly yes, based on the current trajectory. Will the Senate vote to convict and remove? That is less certain, and will depend entirely on whether enough Republicans decide that their political survival requires them to break with Trump. Will Trump face criminal prosecution if he leaves office? Again, almost certainly yes, based on what legal experts are seeing in the evidence. Will he actually go to prison if convicted? That depends on a lot of factors, including the specific charges, the strength of the evidence, the decisions of juries, and the discretion of judges. But it is absolutely a real possibility that cannot be dismissed as political fantasy. What you need to watch over the next few weeks is whether any major Republican senators publicly break with Trump and signal they would vote to convict in an impeachment trial. If that happens, it creates a cascade effect where other Republicans feel permission to do the same, and suddenly conviction becomes a real possibility rather than a long shot. Also, watch for any major developments in the criminal investigations, particularly any indication that indictments might be unsealed, or that plea deals are being negotiated with key witnesses. Every time someone close to Trump flips and agrees to cooperate with prosecutors, the legal walls close in a little bit tighter. And pay attention to Trump's own behavior and rhetoric. The more desperate and unhinged it becomes, the more it signals that the people around him understand how serious the situation really is. This is a defining moment for American democracy, and how it resolves will set precedents that last for generations. Keep your eyes on this story, because we are watching history unfold in real time, and the